First of all, I don't like coffee at Starbucks. Second, my wife and I haven't been going there for several years, simply because during Biden's time, they decided to hire homosexuals and lesbians instead of American war veterans. That is, they had a special hiring program where it used to say that veterans, so to speak, were given priority. But then, instead of that, a different directive appeared, first and foremost to hire those who engage in anal intercourse. And I remember they had pride flags hanging for exactly that, for sex through the very same back passage. Like, we're proud that we use not the penis, but the tongue and hands to satisfy our partner's sexual needs. Sorry for these details. I was and still am very angry at them at Starbucks, but that's not all. The third reason we stopped taking our money to Starbucks was that the staff refused to serve customers in red caps, even if they didn't say Trump or Make America Great Again on them. But overall, my attitude toward this corporation is clear. Although, on the other hand, I admire how from a vision and a single open cafe, a global network grew and hundreds of large and small competitors emerged, picking up this idea. A new industry began in the food trade, coffee shops like the world had never seen before. Just as McDonald's once turned a patty into a McBurger, organized the sale of now billions of meals around the world, and created a new industry, again in the food industry. Having said all that, let's move on to our Sobokoviches, Mamdon, and the corporation's employees. In New York City, the union, incited by the new mayor of New York, announced a strike in 65 cafes across the city. There are many more. I don't know why it's 65. And he led the union members out onto the streets and squares in a parade in front of the television cameras. And the reason for bringing the workers out was that they found out, in their opinion, from their point of view, that there was too much money in someone else's pocket. Namely, the president of Starbucks, who manages 40,000 coffee shops in 80 countries around the world, and there are 16,000 just in the United States alone. And the company's turnover is $37.2 billion a year. That was in 2024, which means the president, the head of this company, received $96 million for 2024. Is that a lot of money? It's a lot, but what do they care? A cup of coffee based on espresso, cappuccino, or something else costs an average of $4.50. In the United States, some states are a bit less, others a bit more, but the average is about $4.50. In 10 years, the price has gone up from $3.50, so by a whole dollar, it increased by a third. Partly because of the general increase in the cost of goods and energy, and partly because of higher wages for employees. On average, an employee costs the company $30, so across the country, it's $30 per hour, which includes an average of $17.50 that they actually take home. And the rest is for pension, benefits, and everything else the company pays for the employee. The minimum wage set by New York City is $16.50, so Starbucks pays more than the minimum. But the president's salary keeps Mamdana and the cafe employees restless.
We're talking about the chief executive officer of the company who made $96 million last year. And if you force these workers to go on strike, I'll be with them on that strike.
So the new mayor of New York didn't waste any time taking control of the Democratic Party and calling for nationwide boycotts. Starbucks, because according to some union members, the company's chief executive officer receives an outrageous salary, earning 6,000 times more than a barista. Even a rookie socialist would tell you that this has to be unfair, right? And as you will see, these protests could spread to other companies in the near future.
Starbucks refuses to negotiate in good faith. They're profiting off my sweat. I work on holidays and weekends, but Brian Nichols doesn't consider my union worthy of negotiations.
Boom, what's our plan of action and how serious could this get? Because this could become very widespread across the country.
Union members and their allies are promising strikes in 25 cities to kick off the holiday season and increase the pressure. Starbucks employees demanded better working conditions, but the company claimed their staff already enjoys some of the best in the industry.
Personally, I think that's what Starbucks deserve. They themselves became the breeding ground for communism, which is now consuming them, devouring them. Now Starbucks thought that since they were on the same side, they wouldn't be touched. And they tried to suck up to those communo-fascists for no reason, thinking, so to speak, that they would protect them because they built their nest right next to them. But it didn't work out. They always devour their own first. It's just that Starbucks management isn't very good at reading. Well, they're good at counting money, but they're very bad at reading history. For example, when the Bolsheviks in the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics first imprisoned and killed all their fellow travelers, and only then did they go after their enemies. The same thing happened with the Jacobins in France, and it's the same here. So, you recruited a bunch of gay activists. Why would they go somewhere to fight someone else? It's easier for them to deal with you, Starbucks. Foolish, short-sighted, old back. You actually deserve it. But in this conflict, I'm on the side of the corporation winning. They're being attacked for the wrong reasons. Well, let's figure this out.
The company is avoiding negotiations and not making decent offers. The company that spent 4 years fighting our union, committing more labor rights violations than any other in United States history. So, the union representative says if they keep going, if they don't stop business, Starbucks could come to a complete halt. But what no one is talking about is that America is full of companies that pay their workers worse than Starbucks, showing that communists have plenty of other targets. We're talking about any business, from Target to Taco Bell. After all, very few entry-level service jobs with part-time hours pay enough to live on in America, let alone afford college or buy a house. And the striking Starbucks workers have made it clear that they feel trapped, and they are. However, we're talking about a part-time entry-level job here. Such positions do exist, yes, but not for getting rich, they're just part of the corporate machine. Which essentially is how any job works, no matter how much even the chief executive officer gets paid. And the harsh reality of this strike is that it shows. Jobs are created and offered primarily for the benefit of the company. And only then, if there's any time left for the employee, including even Starbucks itself, they would have found a cheaper chief executive officer if they could. And if they need baristas or managers, they'll figure out how much they can pay and they'll find enough desperate workers.
Let's start by figuring out the president's pay. Let's say there are 2 candidates. One of them increased sales and revenue at his previous job, meaning profit and income by 20%. Well, at Starbucks, if he does the same, it will be $7 billion. The other candidate also increased it, but by 3%, which is also good. But in this case, it will be $6 billion less. And there are 10 companies that are looking for a good, productive president. How much would you be willing to pay someone who can bring you $7 billion? Let me answer for you. However much it takes to get him, that's how much we'll pay. Because if it's not you, it'll be someone else. That goose, absolutely the one that lays golden eggs, will definitely be snatched up. And that's why you give him just enough so he doesn't run away. What about the person who sells coffee and makes drinks at Starbucks? If there aren't many applicants, they attract them with higher pay. And what if New York City has taken in 1 million undocumented immigrants who have flooded all the construction sites and all the jobs that, let's say, don't require basic work skills? That means 1 million United States citizens ended up without jobs, meaning undocumented immigrants were hired instead of them. And what do? They look for work, willing to take low wages. If a person is willing to earn $17.50, that's actually not a small amount of money. There are tens of thousands of people who want to earn this salary instead of not working and getting unemployment benefits. Why offer, say, 20 an hour instead of 17 if there's a crowd willing to work for 17.50, right? Or even less. They're crowding the doors. It's not like carrying stones. This job is tough. You get tired and sweat. But it's not as hard as hauling stones on a construction site. And Starbucks hired illegals too. Turning a blind eye when closing up because, well, it's not exactly legal, but we're for the illegals. So if you raise wages, then the price of coffee goes up too. And let's say it'll be $6 for you. Yeah, the neighbors have it for 4.50 the competitors. It's clear that some, well, not all of course, but some of your customers will go to them, to the competitors. That means the profit will decrease, and then the president and his team will be fired. Who will fire them? The owners, the shareholders will fire them. And who are the shareholders? They can be pension funds, insurance companies, government institutions, or private individuals.
From masses of retirees to billionaire investors. But
the problem is that these strikers don't understand what allows these companies to treat them this way.
we're talking about the previously open United States border, which allowed tens of millions of illegal immigrants to enter our country. And while you can't blame someone for coming here in search of a better life, you can blame politicians for encouraging illegal immigration, knowing that people will be forced to take any job they can find. That's why big business has never been concerned about illegal immigration. Wages depend on supply and demand. If the supply of labor increases, here's what happens in the labor market.
We're talking about the chief executive officer, the head of the company, who made $96 million just last year. $96 million, which is 606 times more than the average Starbucks employee's salary.
He's absolutely right. The chief executive officer really did make that much. That's a lot of money. Absolutely. But we're missing the main point. We're missing the reason why the chief executive officer makes a ton of money while the workers in those same places don't. Government corruption in America has rigged the game in favor of low worker wages, which increases profits and helps CEOs make more. But when there are a lot of qualified candidates for one job, companies aren't inclined to pay as much as they would if there were fewer workers and they weren't so desperate. And that desperation is made worse by the fact that many workers also have to pay rent.
Why is housing so expensive? Because we flooded the country with 30 million illegal immigrants who are occupying homes that rightfully should belong to American citizens. And at the same time, we haven't built enough new homes.
Now we've smoothly moved on to another problem. Well, let's go back to Starbucks, which actually has the same reason as low wages. Housing, or rather paying for housing in Montana, will stop the rent increase. Agon said to 1 million renters. That is 1 million apartments. That is about a third, approximately between a quarter and a third of everyone who rents apartments in New York City. If you are a developer, you can get a return on the money and effort you invested in construction, only if wages are rising and outpacing inflation. If not, if it doesn't grow at all, or grows only with inflation at best, or grows less than inflation, then you'll invest money in construction, but you won't make any profit. Personally, I've never met anyone that crazy. Yes, it happens. Anything can happen in life. Sometimes you invest and go bankrupt or lose everything. But I've never seen anyone invest knowing they'd get nothing back. Still, I've never met anyone like that. So, in Texas and Florida, for example, yes, you will get a benefit. Where will you build then? Well, obviously not in New York, right? By the way, Staten Island is one of the boroughs of New York. Yes, it's planning to secede. If it does, then you could go there to build, and a bunch of New Yorkers would move there. So more and more people will try to rent apartments, but there aren't many available. 100 people want to rent your apartment. Will you lower the price, or will you say, I'll rent it to the one who pays more? Think about it. You'll say you have 100 people waiting. Do you say, I'll rent it to the one who pays the least, or do you rent it to the one who pays the most? Well, naturally, housing prices will skyrocket because there aren't that many crazy people who would pay less. At the same time, in areas with rent control, no one will want to leave. Why is it cheap there, but in other places it keeps getting more and more expensive? Well, it's the same thing here, yes. But after 5 years, in the places where it's cheap, landlords start making less and less profit. What does that mean? Apartment prices stay the same, but the prices for everything else go up. And they stop cleaning, painting, maintaining, and decorating the houses and streets. Think about it yourself. Why do they do this? Because they don't have money for it anymore. And the neighborhoods of these cheapened apartments slowly turn into slums. The lights go out. Beggars start spending the night there. Crime increases and the police try not to go there very often.
Yes. So, if the number of people needing jobs rises sharply, but the number of jobs stays about the same, and the number of people needing housing does the same thing, and we're not building more houses, we're facing an unprecedented affordability crisis that's already devastating America. The inflation that we all experience every day is happening because the simple equation of supply and demand that drives every economy has been turned upside down because of 4 years of disastrous policies in America, which is a huge problem for these open borders communists who want to talk about affordability. They just can't seem to figure it out because they don't want to.
Exactly.
That's the kind of inequality we're seeing here. And these workers are only asking for the bare minimum. They're asking for a wage they can live on with dignity.
Just recently, the fair minimum was $12 an hour. Then it became $15, now it's $30 a fare. $30. Maybe the problem isn't with the minimum itself, but with the system.
Brian Nickel.
Earned $96 million in 4 months. Honestly, sitting at a desk working full-time, it would take me 2,941 years to earn that same amount.
Do you get that she's an idiot? I hope so. She thinks that by yelling and showing off, she can catch up with the people who make more money for the owners. So it's really none of her business how much the owners pay the hired managers, right? But she and people like her just can't stand other people's millions. One actor earns $20 million for a role, while another makes $5,000 for 10 days of work. He also thinks that's really great. Plus, he also pays his agent, manager, and taxes from that. Yeah, but your face won't bring in viewers, but Tom Cruise or Nicole Kidman will attract millions. That's what they're paid for. And no protests or strikes will bring them in. Josh Moe, the love of the audience, and long lines at the movie theater. You went on strike for 1,000 hours, shouted an April, and still. If your face is on the poster, nobody will come. Maybe someone out of curiosity. And now, of course, your cousin with her boyfriend. Now let's imagine that all the illegal immigrants have been expelled from New York. The apartments where they lived are now vacant. Well, maybe there were 3, 5, or even 10 people in a room. Jobs have become available, and in all industries, they began seeking workers. And now workers are looking for where the conditions are better, where the pay is higher, where there are opportunities for growth, and employers are looking for ways to attract and retain good workers. That is, salaries and conditions are improving.
The Washington Post claims that 1 million foreign workers have left the labor market since March. The Post sees this as a sign of a weakening labor supply, which is good for workers because wages are rising. They keep outpacing inflation, boosting workers' purchasing power, and helping fight high costs. And here it says, in other words, because of the shortage of undocumented workers, businesses had to raise wages to attract workers. Already,
It's already happening. Fewer undocumented workers, so businesses are paying more.
and look, even if Starbucks doesn't hire people who are in the country illegally, at least not knowingly, if the overall labor supply in the country increases, and some companies really do that. What does this lead to? This takes away opportunities from people who are here legally, which forces more people to look for jobs in places like Starbucks. What would the situation be like if the border were closed?
Yes, Sean, there are a few points about this. First, we probably need to build about 5 million new homes. If you look at the red states, we're handling this well. One of the main problems in the housing market, besides too many illegal immigrants occupying homes meant for United States citizens, is that in the blue states, not enough homes are being built. So why are so many people leaving California? Vice.
President raises a very important issue. People who live in regions of the country where there is a housing shortage suffer because of it. Why is there a housing shortage? He just explained why there is less housing than ever before. We didn't build houses and new people came here and they needed housing too. That's a recipe for disaster, a disaster that will only get worse in places like New York, where the new mayor wants to freeze rent for rent-controlled apartments, which will only increase the pressure on market rate rents. Those rents will skyrocket because homeowners will be paying higher taxes and fees than ever before, just for existing, and they'll need to get the money for those taxes and fees from someone. And that someone will be the market rate renters who make up the majority of renters in New York. Because we have a housing shortage, just like workers sometimes face a shortage of jobs. Shortages. Yes, it's bad because they deprive part of the economy of opportunities, they deprive renters of their rights, they deprive workers of their rights. It's bad. We need to fix these things, and punishing companies, punishing housing owners, making these shortages worse won't lead to anything. They profit from my labor. I work on holidays and weekends. But Brian Nichols doesn't think my union is worth negotiating with. She's right. Unfortunately, the chief executive officer doesn't think the union is worth negotiating with because he's sure he's right. Of course, everyone wants Starbucks workers, like this young man who works hard to earn more and live better. The problem is that the rules of the game are rigged in favor of these companies. They don't have to follow the rules, they don't need to improve conditions for workers because there are so many of them. Someone will definitely say these conditions don't scare us. I'm ready to work at Starbucks since I've been looking for a job for a long time. But Starbucks isn't the only company. Here's, for example, a Business Insider chart about the salaries of employees at the 30 largest retail companies in the United States. Starbucks ranks. Ta-da-da-da-dam, 28th from bottom, with a yearly employee salary of just $14,000. That's less than the $17,000 that the same worker would get at McDonald's if they worked there part-time.
Keep in mind, we're talking about part-time workers.
As for Starbucks, the new mayor wants to keep New York as a sanctuary city. The new mayor wants to maintain the status quo. What has allowed every worker in our economy to be exploited, whether legally or illegally? And unfortunately, this will continue, crushing those who work hard but have been completely deceived by a rigged system they don't fully understand. But here we are in 2025, Starbucks ranks 28th out of 30 on that list we saw. They may not be the best, but how bad is working at Starbucks?
Starbucks responded, stating that their employees already have some of the best conditions in the industry, earning $30 an hour salaries and benefits in about 17,000 coffee shops across the country, and insisting that they have also invested $500 million in staff improvement and training. But union members say that's not enough?
With a pause, the idea is Starbucks is so bad that nobody works there, they can't take criticism, and not all of their 17,000 locations are unionized. But we're talking about a very fragile balance. The housing affordability crisis in this country has become so severe due to lawlessness that many people have been pushed to the brink. And the fact that people are getting jobs today, for example at Starbucks, doesn't mean they'll be able to pay rent tomorrow. But the good news is that things are getting better. Affordability is already improving significantly. Things are getting better. Egg prices have dropped a lot, and energy costs have also decreased significantly.
We haven't dealt with inflation yet. We haven't dealt with the standard of living. It takes time for noticeable improvement. We need to clear the country of illegals. We need to change the laws that hinder business. We need to solve the problem with healthcare costs and with bringing jobs back to the United States. We need to make our products competitive.
This is an increase in poverty for everyone. There isn't a single one of the hundreds of countries on the planet that, by implementing policies that ruin businesses, freeze rents, and undermine the economy, has achieved prosperity for its people. We need to follow the laws and implement sensible policies. And then Americans will return to a situation where everything is accessible and the American dream will exist again.
For those who are here legally, Zoran Mamdani, New York's incoming mayor, has called for a boycott ahead of taking office in January. Starbucks published this to more than 1 million followers, taking a strong stand in support of the striking workers. No contract, no coffee, he said. But Starbucks just had their best sales day ever. Not just good or decent, but the very best. And the stock went up. The boycott didn't just fail, it actually helped Starbucks. You might think this is just another political story, MER versus a corporation. But I see something bigger here, something that will impact your life wherever you live. Because what happened reveals a fundamental truth about how the world really works, not how some people think it should work. Understanding this difference will determine if you thrive or struggle in the coming years. Let me explain. When I spent years farming, I learned something that can't be avoided. Nature doesn't care about your plans. Frost destroys the crops, whether you think it's fair or not. A drought doesn't negotiate. You either understand how weather, soil, and seasons really work, or you fail. It's very simple. You can't argue with reality. Either you work within it or it crushes you. The economy works the same way. People's behavior follows patterns not because they are good or bad, but because they predictably respond to incentives. If you don't understand these patterns, all your good intentions are useless. Pause. Think about what Mamdani just tried to do. Pause. He wanted to hurt Starbucks by convincing people to stop buying coffee there. Sounds reasonable, right? Support the workers, show solidarity, apply economic pressure for change. But here's what he didn't understand. Or maybe he did understand, but he didn't care because the gesture looked good to his voters. Either way, the math didn't add up. A strike at 65 Starbucks and 17,000 is less than 0.5% of their locations. Even if all the customers from those stores left, Starbucks would hardly notice. Their revenue would drop by just a fraction of a percent. Not enough to make a difference. But Mamdani thought that his million followers would listen, that people would change their habits because he asked, that he could move millions of customers. Support the workers, and you will be able to promote the workers. Promote, support, and you will be able to promote the workers, and you will have all the necessary means for advancement in the world. Support workers to achieve necessary progress. Support the workers, and you will be able to achieve the necessary advancements. Support the workers, and you will be able to participate with the necessary means for advancement in the world. Most people won't do that, not because of selfishness, not because of indifference to workers, but because changing habits is hard. And most people already have enough worries without adding politics to buying coffee.
Wonderful words. Not exactly on the topic of our conversation, but they definitely describe our reaction to political appeals. I'll do it if it doesn't cost me anything at all. No time, no effort, no money.
Why am I telling you this? Because it's not about Starbucks, not about coffee, and not about a single failed boycott. It's about a pattern you need to recognize, because it will affect your life. Let me tell you about ancient Athens. They had politicians who promised ordinary people everything. We'll take wealth from the rich, we'll make everything fair, we'll build an empire. And people went along and voted for them. Why not? It sounded wonderful, but then reality set in. The rich moved their money to other cities, investments dried up, ambitious military campaigns failed, and Athens became weaker, not stronger. And you know what those politicians would do? They would blame everyone but themselves, traitors, oligarchs, foreign enemies, anyone but themselves. A complete lack of understanding of how systems actually work. This is exactly what's happening in American cities right now. Progressive politicians promise to rebuild the economy. They'll make housing affordable by freezing rent, improve transportation by making it free, lower food prices by opening state-run stores, and radically change how capitalism works. And this won't work, not because I disagree with their goals, but because the mechanics don't work the way they imagine. Listen carefully, because this concerns you directly. When cities freeze rent, housing doesn't become more affordable in the long run. Supply decreases, landlords stop building new properties, existing buildings aren't maintained, quality drops, and a shortage arises, making it harder, not easier, to find housing. When buses become free without sustainable funding, service gets worse, not better. Because the money has to come from somewhere. Either they cut or raise other taxes, or they postpone repairs until the buses break down. There's no magic in just declaring something free and expecting it to get better. When the government tries to run grocery stores competing with private ones, it loses money because the government doesn't know how to do retail. They have no experience. They can't compete with companies that have spent decades optimizing the efficient delivery of food from farms to shelves. These are not my political views. These models have performed consistently in every city that used them. You may wish that reality worked differently, but wishes don't change how the economy actually works. And here's what you need to understand. Mamdani is going to run New York. He made all these promises during his campaign. Rent-freeze, free buses, city-owned grocery stores. He planned to transform the city, but his first major public move only showed he doesn't know how to create real change. Those with companies, not to work with companies. Those who will work with companies. Those who will not work with companies. Those companies, those who will not work with those who do not work with companies, those who do not work with companies, those who do not work with companies, those who will not have the presence, companies that will not work with companies, not to work with companies that look at what is actually happening, not what is promised, not what sounds good in speeches. What really happens when politics meets reality?
That's exactly what I wanted to say. When promises are shattered by reality, those who made the promises blame everything and everyone except themselves. They usually say, if only we had taken more from the rich, everything would have worked out. So next time we'll take much more, and we will take it. Never socialists, never socialists. They never draw any other conclusions. And what about Starbucks? They had the best day in the company's history on the day of that boycott. The best day in the company's history. Starbucks was all over the news, on television, on the radio, and so on. And a bunch of people remembered they wanted coffee and went to buy coffee. And the foolish, deceived employees in New York went off to calculate how many years they'd have to work to get the bonus that the company owners gave to President A for that day. Mom done. He brushed himself off and went on lying further. He doesn't care at all about the employees of Starbucks, Target, McDonald's, or Walmart. And he especially doesn't care about the unemployed, illegal immigrants, homeless people, and bus conductors, if those even still exist. Why am I so confident in saying that he doesn't care about bus conductors? Because he doesn't care about any of us at all, whether we're residents of New York or not. Well, don't forget to subscribe and click the bell so you'll get notifications about new episodes. Goodbye until we meet again.